probably unclear what that meant. Was that talking about access at the physical site for students to be able to maintain, whether in their wheelchair or walkers indoors? Is that talking about that, or is it like, wasn't clear what that meant?
Yeah, so when we bringing this feedback in a public forum, we're summarizing it. The specifics of that that feedback talked more about working elevators in multi-level facilities, as well as parking spaces and washroom accessibility.
So it was the physical makeup of the building to ensure that every individual in the district had complete access to all parts of, whether it's parking, stairs, and that's what that was referring to. Okay, thanks. And second one was respect to some of the considerations. And when I looked at some of them, I look at that and I look at funding out of surplus for programs that are one-off compared to long-term, because if you fund a program on a long-term from your surplus 2 or 3 years, so that is not down the road, we may not be in the financial health that we are now. And so maybe, I'm coming from this district on a conservative side where for many years we had to cut. So when I look at adding programs, I get kind of, okay, we're good now, but 2 or 3 years down the road, where we may not be in financial stability. So when looking at our budget and at the process, are you being conservative to maybe next year, the year after, we may or may not have the financial stability that we have now? Because I'd hate to put something in place that's great and then come next year or the year after not be able to fund it or complete it because we're in a cutting process. So during this process, and I'm not sure who to direct this to, is part of the consideration of some of the new additions to look at long-term funding to one-off funding and how our district will manage that if 2 years down the road we're in a funding crunch where we don't have the financial stability to continue on. So I'm not sure who would answer that, but that would be my concern when adding new programs, is that long-term maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we would not typically recommend anything being used through surplus that isn't like a one-time or temporary in nature for the reasons that you've outlined, right? If it's ongoing, then that's likely to be a commitment over time and will, when we're in a structural deficit position, not help our budget.
I'll just add just to the conversation of the position. I think originally when educational staff was really looking at some of the gaps and needs that we've identified through in the district is we were looking at actually taking pre-existing funding to try to support some of those initiatives. And so I think at this time, I would say that we probably were, this consideration for the position should be placed along with all of the public feedback to determine whether it should be part of the operational budget. I think there are some pieces within this position that lend themselves very nicely to appropriating some of the surplus for a short-term secondment to build capacity within the system. So slightly different than the angle that we started with this. So I think that there is a possibility of actually being able to move forward on a number of these components, but doing so in such a way that there isn't the same vulnerability of long-term of taking additional monies out of operational to create an increased structural deficit to support it. I think we can do it without it. We have had some what looks like positive enrollment growth that would support potentially the opportunity to build in some of those components.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments from Trustee Eldinger?
Well, I just thank you for that question, because I had a similar one in terms of what the rationale was for creating a long-term position rather than like a secondment, like a teaching position. I'm also curious about some of the feedback I see from the Indigenous Education Council about enhanced engagement in future years, and that's some feedback that I've received from a number of people in the system, both staff and parents, that's hoping to return to the model or comparable models from past years where there was longer term engagement prior to just like this month of the budget process. But I also appreciate that we've been in a different year with considerable staff turnover. So that makes sense, but just so people know that has been a request from more than just Indigenous education, as I understand it. And then I'm also curious, if a follow-up question to Trustee Caton's comments about the accessibility request. Does that come from this funding for improvements to accessibility come from our operating funds, or does that come from
There's no ministry.
capital funding? Like if we are seeking to improve accessibility within any context of our schools, is that something that does come through this budget? And I'm looking at like page 39, is it? It sets out services and supplies, or does that come solely from capital funds?
There's no dedicated capital funding from the ministry with regard to accessibility. At this point, if there were wishes for some facility modifications relating to accessibility, I think the recommendation would be we would look to operating surplus to fund like a one-time improvement. And if the board wished to look to continually funding some accessibility initiatives, it could look to doing some transfers through the local capital like we do for some of our other assets.
Checking with the Secretary Treasurer if you wanted to respond to one of Trustee Aldinger's statements about a budget process.
Yeah, I was going to, if I had a chance to respond to their comment about enhanced engagement. And that's definitely been an ongoing dialogue that we've been having as a leadership team in terms of having that look different next year, starting earlier in the year. And when we see such little feedback as a result of an online feedback forum, I can't help but wonder, are we engaging with our partner groups, with the larger school community in the way in which they need to be engaged with, or in the way they want to be engaged with? So, that can take many different structures, and that could include just, offering to go and meet with BPAC or, and doing it in multiple ways, an online way and meetings. We did have the pleasure of attending an IEC meeting, and I do think that they appreciated the fact that the three of us attended the meeting and engaged in engagement at that meeting. But yes, we will start earlier in the year to answer the question and really take a look at not only our process, but our process for engagement, our staffing process. A lot of improvement to be had there.
Vice Chair Leslie?
I had a question about the comment under academics. Just curious how understand this a little better. That's feedback. Do you know where that came from?
So that says in the summary on the in the briefing, it notes grouping children according to academic level and ability to use enrichment material. Comment refers to having kids in a certain academic level grouped together so that teachers are teaching at that similar level. And enrichment material available so that children who are ready to move up to the next level have the ability to move up to the next level, and that they would benefit from it. That's really the gist of the comment that came in.
Could I speak? Yeah. Thank you. It's not really answering a question, but maybe just hopefully contributing to the conversation. I think we also have to understand or be aware that when we talk about budget and budget conversations, that they're actually, I don't think there's a conversation that I've been involved in that isn't a budget conversation. So for example, 4 days of writing the strategic plan and the direction that's been set is a budget direction. Listening to needs in various places is a budget conversation. And when I think of the work that the trustees have engaged in terms of clearly articulating a core set of values. That's a budget conversation. So I just want to also add that that the budget conversation, and part of the necessary budget conversation, is actually having the difficult conversations, even with our principals and vice principals as co-leaders, around what is it in our system that may not be accomplishing all that we intended to do. How do we realign? So it's not just this time of the year where we say we're in a structural deficit, what do we cut? Or we have $300,000, what do we add? It's also the conversation about what is our intention? How do we ensure that every dollar is getting the most for those learning pathways for our kids? So I think just to acknowledge that budget conversations are also part of the core work throughout the year as we shape priorities and set direction. And I do believe that the strategic plan is a fundamental shift, and it's a lens through which we will be able to view all budgetary decisions. So I'm excited to have that document and that kind of compass direction set with that strategic plan.
Any other queries or comments from trustees? Oh, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add to our superintendent's comment. What I've been hearing from some secretary treasurers in other jurisdictions is that they are recognizing that strategic plan engagement as part of the budget engagement process. So although it's referred to as strategic planning, it really is part of engagement towards the budget. So, and there are some jurisdictions trying to just utilize that as part of their budget process, so they're not doing the work twice too. So,
Thank you. Trustee Caden?
So just one final quick question. So is it the plan still to, at our June board meeting, bring forth the budget for approval?
So the idea on June 11th would be to bring forward to you a preliminary budget and a draft of what that would look like, the bylaw, the template that is required to go to the ministry for your review, and to take any direction that might occur in this meeting to embed in that budget. I think one of the things that we were wondering about, further to what our superintendent talked about, is if we do not include the district principal that was originally discussed in earlier reports, that would again reduce our appropriation of surplus by to the $800,000. But what we could do is restrict some surplus monies to ensure that we are doing elements of that work. And I don't know if you would like to expand further on that, but that's what I think that we could do in order to not increase our structural deficit.
Yeah, I think just really simply is looking at the potential use of some of the surplus funds to support some of those initiatives that build capacity but are short term.
Seeing no.
I can make a motion
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
that the Board of Education of School District Number 71, Comox Valley, receive the public feedback regarding the 2024-25 annual preliminary operating budget.
Here, please. Vice Chair Leslie is seconding. Any last chance for discussion? Seeing none. Those in favor? Carried. Moving on to section 10, or number 10 of our agenda, board standing committee reports. And we have the open committee of the whole board report, May 14th, 2024. For a trustee to move the motion. Trustee Howe?
The Board of Education of School District 71, Comox Valley, received the open committee of the whole board report dated May 14th, 2024 as presented.
Seconded by trustee Maysack. Any discussion on the report? All those in favor, please signify. Carried. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to section B of Board Standing Committee reports. On the Ad Hoc Policy Committee, the Ad Hoc Policy Committee report to the board from December 18th, 2023. Looking for a trustee to move that motion. Excuse me, Trustee Aldinger.
The Board of Education of School District 71, Comox Valley received the Ad Hoc Policy Committee report to the board dated May 1st, 2024.
Seconder, Vice Chair Leslie.
Was the 18th? I was supposed to do that for December 18th.
Sorry. It's been moved and seconded, and I just want to note that that report is a few months behind schedule, to be followed by the May 1st more recent report. Apologies to the board for not getting that to the board in a more timely manner. A couple of bumps, and thanks to the trustees for their patience on that. Any discussion on the December, any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? And that's carried, thank you. And then next. Hal, thank you.
The Board of Education of School District 71, Comox Valley received the Ad Hoc Policy Committee report to the board dated May 1st, 2024 as presented.
Made by Trustee McCallum-Keen. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify. And opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. And the next Ad Hoc Policy Committee meeting is tomorrow, Wednesday, May the 29th at 4 o'clock. Next, moving on to board business, we have a verbal report for Gender-Based Violence Committee by Trustee Aldinger.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The assistance of our superintendent, we have reached out to our partner groups and to different sets of committee members to encompass a counselor, principal or vice principal, teacher, a member of our Indigenous Education Council, a member from CUPE, and a member from DPAC. We've sent out invitations to individuals in all of those categories and received positive feedback from everyone, and a straight up yes from most. 2 people have declined, citing just they're too busy. But we feel we have enough to move forward with scheduling. We had hoped to have 2 meetings before the end of the year, but as we're often finding, things take a little longer than we expect. And so between hearing from our partner groups that this is such a busy time of year for educators, we have decided that we'll just have an introductory committee meeting in June with an expectation that we'll get started with greater diligence in the next school year. But that would be a good opportunity to at least introduce one another and start generating ideas for the next year.
Any questions for Trustee Aldinger? Thank you, and Trustee Hal for your work on that committee.
So good to get moving on it.
And then next, we have our Indigenous Education Council meeting trustee written report. And Vice Chair.
Thank you. It's quite a long report this time. I was reporting on the capacity building days on May 15th and 16th, 2024. I jotted down some points that followed the work that we did through the period of our time together. I think the most relevant and important information comes from the Deputy Minister's Bulletin on Indigenous Education Council's funding, and that is attached for you to have a look at. But what this means in support of IECs is that as members on a council, that the council is now funded in a way to support an actual meeting to happen so that people can attend, that they have what they need in order to do the work on a council, and that they are paid for their work. There are various ways that the dollars that are allocated to this district for the funding are to be spent, and there are guidelines, and there is of course, a reporting out document that needs to be made that looks at exactly, that addresses all of the components needed in terms of allocating that funding and being responsible to that funding to the ministry. I think this is just an amazing time to be an IEC. This district has had an IEC for more than 20 years. So the fact that their terms of reference and they've been gathering and meeting and doing this work without any of that support is quite amazing. And community has given their time and knowledge and expertise and their passion for years. And Bill 40 has allowed us now to support our council in a good way. So I encourage you to have a read. It's quite wonderful. The highlight was day 2 of the gathering, and that was where the grade 4s in the district came to the big house, and the Kumagway Cultural Society supported the storytelling through dance and sharing of songs and stories for all of the grade 4s in the district. I think that we haven't had a grade 4 gathering in the big house for quite a few years, and that the enthusiasm shared was quite remarkable. We had some of our community that were asked to dance and were stood up and honored through the Eagle Dance, and it was just quite wonderful to be a part of, and for those who attended. Myself, I was home ill while this was going on, and it was very tough to be at home when this was happening. But I knew sharing my germs would not be a good thing. So from everyone that I spoke to, it was an amazing event, and those who attended learned so much in a very open and generous way, and really like to acknowledge and thank the Kumagway Cultural Society for inviting us, for having us, and for all of their knowledge and expertise and the willing to share from their heart so that we all could learn how to be and walk on this traditional territory, this unceded traditional territory of the Comox Nation, the Aiks and Pentlatch, Satlut and Sisseton peoples. That's it. Thank you.
Any questions or?
I just add a quick comment. After that big day, my grade 4 son came home and was very excited to have participated in it and felt quite honored to be there, and great conversations had around the dinner table. So it was a really exciting day for him. And yeah, I think him and his little group of buddies were all quite thrilled. When you can get grade 4s inspired and excited and asking questions later on at the dinner table that kind of spark great conversations, it's, that they're having a great day, and it's a special treat for them to be invited there. So.
There was also maybe adding to your report, there was an opportunity last week for grade 11 students who are taking the Indigenous Peoples 11 course to attend an event. And I know there was several trustees that attended the afternoon event, and it also was wonderful to listen and learn along with our students in the district from the wise people in the center of the room sharing the information. Right, so board correspondence, we do not have any. And next, at 7:49, we will move to the public question period for the board for items that were contained in our meeting today. And I will ask for the folks that get to look online to see if there's any questions, to be looking while I turn to the public in the room to see if they have any questions about something in our board package today. Go ahead.
A quick question. For your public feedback collected, was there a description of additional needs for student support? Like, was there feedback from the community for what they thought we needed besides more EAs? Was there specific things that they were asking for?
I will turn that question to the superintendent, who will then get to decide if
Yeah,
we have the information.
I'm not
to
sure about
navigate
that specific, but I would share that one of the components that we received in the strategic plan feedback was a call for more supports. And that ranged really across from terms like more educational assistance, more LST time, more sport, more. So I don't know the specifics of that particular comment, but certainly it's reflective of what we're hearing around trying to support students in a different way.
I'm always curious what the public perception is. Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Go ahead.
Two questions. First one, regarding school fees. We noticed that it's mostly high school heavy, which is great. Enter is an elementary school program, I believe, and I'm just curious if those fees, what the process is for those kind of fees at that elementary school level, because we don't see that here. And is that hardship policy applying to that as well? Is that communicated at that time?
Yeah, thanks. We'll make sure that it is. It certainly does apply to all programming. I think what you see is a distinction in elementary. There are supply fees, but not necessarily activity fees, the same that there are connected to specific courses or pathways or even programming at the high school level. So absolutely, we need to ensure that anybody who is registered for a program that has additional fee is made clear that there is a hardship policy. It applies to all, really anything that's charged in the district. We need to be prepared to pay for families that can't provide that. So we need to ensure that there's no barrier. So it does apply.
Just to comment on that, just as a person that has children at high school levels and does pay fees, a lot of that is communicated by the teacher or the coach that is having that conversation. So at the time of a child entering a school sports team or whatever, that information is talked about and relayed, that, but it's not necessarily, I wouldn't look to the website and the school fees to find that information. I would, more pointed contact to the person that's in charge of it. It's for verification that is done.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think where the conversation went earlier was just the need to ensure that there is a piece that says if you're participating in extracurricular, that a fee may apply, and two, if you are participating in extracurricular and we've charged you a fee that you can't pay, we will help support that. So I think it's just making sure that those general communications are shared.
I got it. That's why I put my hand.
Sorry.
I understand.
Was that both your questions? Okay, so that was like 1A and 1B, and then now it's question 2? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, I didn't know one was.
No, I'm just, you didn't know the answer, so.
Yeah. Question 2, just regarding surveys. We noticed that in this information on the package that it says the budget survey was May 14th to 22nd. We're curious about what the average length of surveys is and why, how that information is determined, being open to the public for feedback. So that's the question. Just in response to this, if the survey was open May 14th to 22nd, for example, for DPAC, we have our meeting at the beginning of the month, we communicate this to the reps, and then throughout that month is the different PAC meetings, and that is how they communicate out to their school communities and to get that feedback. So I'm just curious about that feels a little, how do I make this a question? Does that feel to you a bit in conflict with each other? Yeah, that's a question.
It is a question for sure. The answer is yes, that's a very tight timeline. And I think that, I think we've already articulated that this particular budget cycle has been compressed in a way that we would aspire to not have it as compressed next year. I think the 14th happened to be the day after or the day of our committee of the whole. And so what I would suggest is this. I think that when we're talking about surveys, we have put out a few this year for sure. One, we need to be really clear what the timeline is. And I know that there's been one or two surveys that end date isn't necessarily clear. And I know there was a recent situation where a whole group of PAC members was really enthused to fill in a survey and then it closed that morning. So just acknowledging we need to be really clear with those timelines, and we need to give some breathing room around it to ensure that opportunity to provide feedback is long enough that people can meaningfully engage in that. And so there's certainly some learning there. I think that there's also a saturation point. So for example, I think we had our strategic plan survey out for quite a while. We had over 500 respondents. We pushed it. We marketed it. We marketed the closing date, last chance. And I think that that's probably more along the lines of what we would aspire to with surveys, is just really giving it that breathing room. So the question is, could we improve on our process with that? And I think the answer is for sure. And there's a commitment to do so. Yeah.
Thank you for your questions. And still nobody out in the, on their couch watching the meeting with a burning question. Well, on that note, I, in advance of adjournment, just like to thank everybody who took the time to come to our meeting today now live, or has the chance to watch it again at a later time recorded, or is watching somewhere sitting on their couch or out in their garden listening to it. So on that note, looking for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Masak?
That the Board of Education of School District Number 71 Comox Valley adjourn this meeting.
And the seconder. Trustee Aldinger? All those in favor? Carried, and the meeting is adjourned at 7:57. Thank you. And did Trustee